What is up, everybody? Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome back to Marvel Rivals. Welcome back to the channel. Today I thought we would do something a little bit different again, and we are going to actually be spectating TimTheTatman today. You can see him right here. I'm skinny, and he plays Magneto, Strange, and Groot in this replay. I enjoy watching Tim. I think he's a super entertaining streamer. He's very good at what he does, but I do think he gets a lot of hate, maybe due or undue, as far as like how good he is. Definitely a boosted accusator, or whatever you want to call it. So figured we would go into a replay, maybe see if there's things that he can improve, things that he does that are good as well. So we're not going to try and be too critical, definitely just going to go through, enjoy the replay, and see if we can identify some things that he can maybe do better, things that are maybe a little bit simple that should be being done, and some good things that he does as well. Once again, I do enjoy watching Tim as a streamer. This isn't meant to be any sort of like clickbait sort of thing, but with so many viewers and so many people voicing their opinions, thought I would kind of give all of you here a place to voice any of that in the comments too. Thought it would be kind of fun to go through and be a little bit more critical. So off the rip here, realizing that the enemy team does have a Doctor Strange, so they want to keep this high ground. They're looking for where the portal might be. They hear the enemy over on their left hand side, so they know they're not portaling. He does drop to low ground here, ends up blowing his left shift, which is a pretty long cooldown, so I don't know why you would immediately go to low ground, especially if you're the person that's supposed to be standing in front of your team. Goes to low ground again, even though the Doctor Strange is up on high, and I think in this situation you probably want to be matching him, but it's okay because the Doctor Strange drops to low ground, and the enemy team is just pushing in from this left-hand side. He's not getting a whole lot of healing here. I would say that it's a little bit unfortunate that he's staying at a little bit of health for a little bit too long, but his Namor is actually picked off, so they do have to back up, concede a couple ticks on this point, and I think he just tries to get in here to stop them from getting the first point very, very easily. Unfortunately, the enemy just kind of gets around him. He and the Magneto overlap shields, so they're not blocking and standing behind each other, and he does just get taken out there. Definitely could have played that better or kept people in front of him, but I do think that his healers were kind of struggling to keep everyone up there. I think his team was taking way more damage than they probably should have. And this is my first time watching through the replay, so if I miss something, please let me know in the comments. If there's anything that you think is super important, super crucial that I miss, definitely let me know. I do read through all the comments. I do reply to all of them, so yeah, let me know what's going on. So coming back over here, tries to take high ground using his left shift to see who's up above him, and using this corner as line of sight. He does do a pretty good job this game of throwing out his auto attacks and pulling up his shield as well in between them when there's a little bit of pressure. As you can see, auto attacking, putting up the shield, going from there. The Jeff on his team does ult and actually gets taken out though, so they are -1 healer, and they do have an Atom that spirit bonds, so they're able to stay a little bit safer. The Luna ult is coming out as well because the Namor on the enemy team does ult, and he steps up knowing that he does have that Luna ult behind him to fall back on. Unfortunately, he is kind of out of range of her, it looks like. The Luna ult is still going. He drops down to 300 and isn't really getting healed a whole lot past that, so I think his backline is just trying to live. The enemy Luna ults, and he gets a nice one shot on the Cloak and Dagger, but is taken out. His team is very, very far behind him. Don't think that's necessarily his fault, but definitely not super aware of where the rest of his team is or wants him to play necessarily. Getting rezzed by the Atom here. The Doctor Strange and the enemy team does not get a super good ult, and Invisible Woman ult comes up on the enemy team. I think here I probably wouldn't blind fire into the abyss of the Invisible Woman ult. I would focus on taking out the Namor turret first, but that's just a very kind of nitpicky thing. Steps up here as well. Gets absolutely fried. The Magneto and him are also definitely not on the same page here. They should probably be taking turns blocking a little bit more. Magneto should have had his barrier up there, so he could have backed up a little bit, played behind the Magneto, or even played some cover as his shield took a ton of damage there. And the enemy is just able to take this first point pretty easily. Goes back into the spawn room. I think they're just contemplating a switch. His Magneto actually switches to Hawkeye. He switches to Magneto. Not sure if that was a switch either. I think the 2 tanks thing is probably something that they need, but let me know in the comments if you think that that was a good switch or not. I always think 2 tanks, 3 healers, 1 DPS is just, it feels way better for me. As a healer main especially, it's easier to keep people up, easier to make sure those tanks have a lot of pressure. But gets a little bit demolished here. Runs out of the Loki heal as well, but his healers are able to heal him up. Playing some good cover here and just letting this enemy get, unfortunately, a lot of distance off of this point. His Namor ults, the Cloak and Dagger on the enemy team ults, and he is just taking a ton of damage. He is also topped off there and uses his F on himself to do the self shield, which I may have saved, especially because his Luna ults there, may have saved for an ally to keep them alive. He definitely didn't need to use that, especially with those cooldowns being so long. Luckily, they are very, very, they are still able to posture up and keep the point. Unfortunately, he does concede a lot of ground here. Probably doesn't realize that the point is, 0.3 meters away from the end of the line, and it gives up that point, even though they probably had a little bit more gas left in the tank. So, as the tank, definitely want to be the person that is touching that point, especially if he's the only tank too, since they just swapped off that other one. Might have also just kind of forgot that they had that Hawkeye instead of the usual Magneto that he was in Doctor Strange, so they used to be running 2 and maybe just didn't register. So going into this second round, we gotta tie it up 3-3 if we want this game to keep going. So stepping up pretty aggressively here, using his F to stop some of this damage. Gets over here, unfortunately, sort of kidnapped by the Bucky. And if he had his F, he might have been able to survive there with a self shield, but he uses it to defuse any of the damage as he's walking up. I think he probably could have used his left shift to block that instead, just because, that comes off cooldown a lot quicker. Especially as Magneto, it's definitely your intermittent sort of blocking vibe. Your F is going to be that last resort, help me sort of thing. So pushing up with your shift is probably a little bit better. That's what I've seen a lot of good players do. His Black Panther is kind of popping off, creating a ton of chaos in the backline, and is able to push back the enemy healers. Jay is able to get a pick on the enemy Namor, and the enemy team is not going to have a whole lot of damage or a whole lot of sustain as they lose their singular tank. Once again, using his F to shield himself. At that point, it doesn't really matter. He can use his left shift or his F, but it is an interesting panic reaction just to make sure that you are taking no damage, even though he was probably fine regardless, even though that Bucky hooked him. I also forget, does Bucky go through Magneto shield? I don't remember if that's a thing or not, because I think it is a projectile, but I swear I've been pulled out of Magneto shield before. Going right back in, fighting inside the Cloak and Dagger ult here. His team gets kind of wiped here, and he just backs way, way, way up, waiting for them to respawn. They do have access to Mantis ult and Luna ult, so should have a couple really good stall ults, very good push ults to kind of get going. Playing this line of sight, not giving the enemy too much ult charge, which I think is a good thing to do. Gets pulled by the Bucky. Bucky gets slept, drops kind of low, not able to kill him, unfortunately. This is a situation where I think I probably would have ulted as Magneto. He's kind of sitting on it for a long time, but works in a couple melees there as he's killing the Doctor Strange to make sure that if that shield goes up, he's still pushing forward on damage. They take the Invisible Woman low. He's able to finish her off, and they just run down the Luna, and unfortunately not able to get that kill. Jay gets picked, which is a little bit awkward. And the Namor is actually still doing a lot of work on his team in the backline, so they're not even able to get that much distance on this point because the rest of his team is not able to follow with that push. So I think he probably overextended there. Him and Jay definitely kind of dove deep, and it was just maybe not worth it, but I don't know. I think especially if you're playing with people like Mantis and Luna playing together and playing that more of like a death ball sort of style, definitely a good thing to do, and it wasn't done there. Definitely. I think they should have killed the enemy Namor much, much quicker, but uses his E on the Luna there, keeps her alive for just a second, but way too much damage comes through. probably could have stepped up and shielded some of that damage as well. Use his E to stall so he can get that little bit of extra distance. Gets a nice one-shot on the Cloak and Dagger, though, as his team comes in and tries to return a couple KOs on this enemy team. Melees through the Doctor Strange shield. Good knowledge of tech. And just ushering this point towards the first checkpoint. They still do have 2 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock, so they should be fine rounding this corner up here. The enemy team taking a little bit longer to regroup. Not sure if they are portaling or not. No, they're just kind of coming up this hallway. His Black Panther gets a nice pick on the enemy Invisible Woman, and he just wants to stay on this point and help it reach its destination. And the more ult coming in takes Bucky low. His Bucky ends up getting a nice ult and a reset on the enemy Bucky, so they should be up a couple DPS at this point. The Luna ult in the enemy team does come out, but it is just a stall ult. They don't have a whole lot of damage. They get a nice kill on the Cloak and Dagger, and the Bucky is still resetting, still going a little bit crazy, and is able to mop up the enemy team as they round this corner and take the first point, making the score 2-3. It is nice that this point doesn't really stop as well, so this doesn't have like an animation of the doors opening. Door opens and it just kind of keeps going. That's pretty nice. There's a couple maps where it doesn't really matter what you do. You can push a little bit further up. You don't need to stand on the point to make it go faster or anything like that, and this is not one of those maps, so definitely interesting. Steps up here trying to help his Black Panther. Drops to about half HP pretty quickly. Don't think he used his left shift or any of his shields there. Takes the Namor low, still just posturing up. I would still probably be blocking a little bit more damage, even if you don't really need to. I think just he could have used his shield at least a couple times here to block a little bit of damage, because effectively you are giving the enemy ult charge if you're just soaking the body shots. So definitely something to keep in mind. If you're playing tank, sometimes you can just you can be taking a lot of damage. Your blocked stat will be very, very high, but you are just taking damage and giving enemy ult charges quicker. I did have a Venom like that last week that just took so much damage. We were healing him through it, but we definitely weren't getting quite enough compared to how much damage he actually took. Tries to block the Doctor Strange ult. His Luna reacts very well to that and should be able to keep them all alive as they usher the point to this final checkpoint. And the enemy doesn't put up a whole lot of a fight in that last half of the escort. So they're going to be going into a fourth round with just about a minute left, or 2 minutes left on the clock. They should add a minute to both of their scores here, unless I am tripping. No, that's already happened. Never mind. So we're at 2 minutes on his team and 3 minutes on the other team. Sticking with the Magneto, and they are on offense first. And again, I would probably still hold up the shield here every so often in case he takes a little bit of damage to stop the enemy from just farming ult off of him. That shield does have a pretty short cooldown. It doesn't have a very long recharge rate. It doesn't get depleted or anything like that, so feel free to use that when you need it. Again, has not used his shield a single time as he's pushing up to this point. Could be keeping people healthy behind him. There's the first use of the shield. His Black Panther actually falls, as well as his Bucky. So at this point, I would just be backing up, and we can see that he does that. Uses his F on himself, unable to save J there because he's using his F on full HP. Again, not trying to be overcritical, but there's just a lot of things that I feel like I've noticed in some of these replays that I've been watching, and I think it's important to, we can learn from this. I believe they still win this game. From what I don't think I would have clicked on a losing replay necessarily, but gets pulled into the point and taken out there. But they are looking at Luna ult and almost Mantis ult, so they should have a pretty good push coming. They do have 40 seconds on the clock though, so it's going to be a little bit tight on time, but hopefully they are able to get there. But like I was saying, yes, not trying to be overly critical or anything like that. He is still a good player. He is still Grandmaster. I don't think he's truly boosted. He was a very good Overwatch player back in the day as well. So, I don't know. It's a learning experience. I think everyone is just trying to learn in this game, right? And whether someone is getting destroyed, whether they're doing the destroying, I think rarely do people play perfectly in this game. So there's always something to learn. He's also very good at getting one-shots on people with the Magneto ult. So, gets a nice pick on the Cloak and Dagger there. and they are just able to stand on this point with the Luna, making sure that they stay healthy. The enemy Luna ults as well, the enemy Invisible Woman ults just as that fades. So it is going to be pretty hard to take out any of the enemy players during this time. His Bucky gets kind of destroyed as he goes into the back line. But the enemy Bucky and the enemy Namor are taken out by Jay and the Luna. And they're able to get onto this point, meleeing through the Magneto barrier. Trying to get a couple there. Unfortunately, you can't melee through the F. And just trying to block a little bit more damage for his team. Finally using his left shift to block that. His Black Panther goes crazy in the back line. And they're able to clean up the enemy team. Get all 3 ticks of this point, I would imagine. Since they don't have a Doctor Strange, I don't think they'll be able to get back here fast enough. And let's start the overtime payload escort. At this point, we're just going for maximum distance, so leaving anything on the table is a terrible idea. Get a little poke on the enemy team here. He should probably not be the one riding the payload here either. Definitely leaving a ranged character, but I can understand with just a sliver of overtime, if he doesn't have someone on comms to communicate that with, he definitely wants to maybe be the person to do that just to guarantee that it is done. Does step off payload here, seeing that the Punisher turret is on, so he knows as long as he's seeing that turret firing, Punisher is on that. Steps back on as soon as the Punisher turret is destroyed. His Namor gets an ult here and actually gets a double kill on the Invisible Woman and the Magneto. Pretty nice. Again, steps off a point. I would definitely be double checking, but he does see the Punisher behind him, so he has a general idea of where that guy is standing. I would always double check before I go off point. I don't know if they're in comms or communicating this through chat or anything like that, but especially with randoms, you definitely want to make sure that when your overtime is on just a sliver like this, you are able to stay on that point and not accidentally step off or something. This Magneto walks up and gets taken very, very low. Invisible Woman's able to keep him alive. And this is the part where I think Magneto ult does take you off a point though, so that was a little bit sketchy if someone else wasn't standing on there. His Luna ults to keep them all safe, and they are just going to be trading ults here. Luna ult on the enemy team, Punisher ult on his team. There is going to be a lot of damage coming through. Punisher's actually able to kill the Bucky through the Luna ult here. His Panther's able to get 2 more. Unfortunately, the Moon Knight on point is too strong, and they just have to take the 4-3. So going into the 4th and final round, I think they're feeling pretty confident. They did get the payload pretty far there. And I think he does play that overtime relatively well. Switching over to Groot for this last point. I should probably switch to his POV, huh? That is definitely something to do. And let me know if there's any other streamers that you want me to spectate. If there's any other content you want to see. As usual, leave a comment, all that sort of stuff. Like the video if you liked it. And again, I also do appreciate the amount of support you guys have shown the channel so far. So keep it up, and thank you guys again. Once again, playing this high ground over here. Not going to be quite the same because he's not playing Doctor Strange. Uses his Groot walls in a little bit more of an interesting fashion. We did spectate the guy yesterday that was playing Groot, and he used his walls very differently. I think he walls himself off a little bit, almost creates a line of sight for his own healers here. And I think Groot is definitely a character where you want to be more intentional with the walls if you can, not just using them as body shields. Does still have his 3 walls out. They're not being destroyed very well, so I don't know. Able to take Groot here low. His Moon Knight has already built up ult, which is very, very good. His Luna ults to defuse the Invisible Woman ult from the enemy team. His Moon Knight pops ult and gets 1. Jay gets 2, and he makes it 3. Jay makes it 4, and the Magneto makes it 5. They're able to fend off the enemy team just with a minute and 30 or so on the clock. When we were looking at the Groot yesterday, they definitely played a little bit more intentional with the walls, walling people off of their own team, seeing someone who steps up. I think that situation was a little bit harder to actually get value out of that concept, but throwing down walls can sometimes make your healers' jobs absolutely awful, especially with characters like Luna. So uses them a little bit better here, gets pulled into the enemy team, gets very kidnapped a little bit there. Backs up and puts a wall between himself and the enemy, which is definitely a good play, and walls off the whole left-hand side with his bigger wall. Unfortunately, still line of sighted by the enemy Groot. And the enemy team pops 4 ults, so they are definitely going to lose this fight. Luna ult is popped, Bucky ult, Groot ult, and Magneto ult are all popped, so his team should just go down here. And there's not a whole lot that they can do about that one, so chalk that up to unfortunate, I suppose. Groot is also very good at building ult charge for the enemy team as well if you're just taking a ton of damage too. So like we were mentioning before, shield tanks, they have kind of a way to diffuse that. But Groot will just be kind of a body tank, so you can't accidentally let people just farm ults off you. Pops his E here, uses it for the healing and the max health, getting a little bit of value off of that. Probably should be walling off the Groot and the Magneto here, trying to keep them a little bit separate from their team when they step up like that. But he steps back and kind of gets walled off himself, so the enemy Groot definitely playing the walls a little bit better. He gets shielded by the Magneto and the Luna on his team ults to keep them both safe. You should definitely be trying to play like the corner of the payload here to keep it from getting that little bit of extra distance. And there's just far too many Groot walls. I just am not a fan. He does wall off the Groot pretty well there. They end up getting a pick on him, but unfortunately, his team is mostly taken out. And I don't know how they're going to be turning this. The Mantis on his team ults, and they're still in overtime. Just a very, very small sliver to go. The enemy Luna ults to try and keep them in the game and get this last piece of the puzzle. Thank God his Doctor Strange is able to switch to Doctor Strange and port them over to point. He's just throwing walls every which place, trying to get a little bit of extra damage. This Magneto has nowhere to go, and his Panther actually gets a 3-piece there, and they're actually able to squeeze out the win. Definitely not a perfect game. Definitely some weird wall placements. I would hate to have been a healer in this game, trying to heal anyone in those walls, especially Luna, but they do get the dub. Whether it was deserved or not, who knows? But I think at the end of the day, he is still a pretty good player, still knows the general concept of the game. But definitely a lot of things to improve on. As you can see, he does go 28-9, does a good amount of damage, still keeps up with, you know, his DPS to some degree. His Namor actually cranks though, and he does take a ton of damage here, so that is also an interesting stat. Pay attention to how much you're blocking too when you're a tank. I mean, this Doctor Strange is probably using his shield quite a bit, so he's going to have a little bit of a higher blocking stat. But if you were a body tank or something like that and your stats are way high on blocked, definitely keep that in mind. You might just be building ult for the enemy team a little bit too much. So let me know if you want me to spectate any other streamers. Like I said before, if there's anyone specifically you want me to check out a replay, I always appreciate your guys' suggestions. And like the video if you liked it, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.